He succeeds me as Duke of Cornwall and takes on the responsibilities for the Duchy of Cornwall, which I have undertaken for more than 5 decades.
4 years. Royal watchers assumed that when the next chapter of the monarchy finally arrived, the transition would feel gradual, almost predictable. Instead, one appearance changed the conversation overnight. Cameras captured the moment, crowds reacted instantly, and inside royal circles a far more intriguing question began to emerge. Was this simply the future queen stepping into a larger role, or had Catherine just signaled that a very different royal era was already beginning? No announcement was needed. No dramatic declaration echoed through palace corridors. Yet according to many royal observers, the atmosphere surrounding Catherine, Princess of Wales, appeared noticeably different the moment she entered the spotlight during what many commentators would later describe as one of the most symbolic public appearances of her royal journey. The attention was immediate, almost instinctive, as though people were witnessing not merely another engagement, but a glimpse of something much larger taking shape before their eyes. What made the moment so fascinating was not what Catherine said. In fact, some of the strongest reactions emerged from what she did not say at all. While public attention naturally focused on her appearance, body language experts, royal commentators, and longtime palace watchers began examining a different story unfolding beneath the surface. Why did the atmosphere seem to shift so quickly? Why did so many headlines focus less on protocol and more on presence? And perhaps most importantly, why did discussions surrounding Queen Camilla's family suddenly return to the center of the royal conversation? To understand why this appearance generated such intense interest, it is necessary to look beyond the photographs and ceremonial traditions that usually dominate royal coverage. Over the past several years, Catherine has gradually transformed from a popular member of the royal family into something far more significant. Her influence has not expanded through controversy or confrontation. Instead, it has grown through consistency, discipline, and an image of stability that many believe resonates strongly with the public during a period of uncertainty for the monarchy. That gradual rise has been impossible to ignore. Whether appearing alongside Prince William, the Prince of Wales, representing the crown at major events, or returning to public duties following personal health challenges, Catherine has increasingly become associated with continuity and reassurance. Polls, media coverage, and public reaction have repeatedly suggested that many people view her as one of the institution's strongest assets. Yet popularity alone does not explain why this particular appearance created such a powerful reaction. Something else seemed to be happening. Several royal commentators noted that the public response felt unusually emotional, almost as though people were reacting not to the present moment, but to a future they believed they were witnessing begin to take shape. The symbolism was difficult to miss. Catherine appeared composed, confident, and remarkably comfortable under the intense scrutiny that accompanies senior royal life. For supporters, it looked like confirmation that she was already preparing for responsibilities that would eventually place her at the very center of the monarchy. But that interpretation raised another question. If Catherine's growing prominence represents the future of the institution, where does that leave the networks of influence that developed during King Charles III's reign? For years, Queen Camilla's family became increasingly familiar figures around royal events and public discussions. Their presence was often viewed as part of the monarchy's evolving landscape. Yet whenever power begins to shift within any institution, attention inevitably turns toward who gains influence, who loses it, and who may find themselves adapting to a completely new reality. According to some royal analysts, that is precisely why this appearance attracted so much interest behind palace walls. The discussion was never truly about a single event. It was about what the event might represent. Was the public witnessing a natural transition toward the next generation of royal leadership, or were deeper changes already occurring within the structure of the royal household long before any formal transition had taken place? Those questions only became more intriguing as additional details and interpretations began emerging in the days that followed. Because while the headlines focused on Catherine's remarkable appearance, conversations inside royal circles reportedly centered on something far more significant. What if this wasn't merely a memorable royal moment? What if it was the first visible sign that the balance of influence inside the monarchy was already beginning to change in ways few people fully understood? And if that was true, the developments that followed would become even more surprising. What made the reaction to Catherine's appearance so significant was not the applause, the headlines, or even the endless discussion that followed. It was the timing. Royal appearances are often interpreted through symbolism, but this moment arrived during a period when questions about the future direction of the monarchy had already begun circulating behind the scenes. For many observers, the appearance seemed to confirm that a transition long discussed in theory was beginning to feel real in practice. That perception carried consequences far beyond a single public event. Whenever a royal institution moves toward a new generation of leadership, attention naturally shifts toward the people who may shape that future. Over the years, influence within royal circles has never depended solely on titles. Relationships, access, trust, and proximity to senior figures have often mattered just as much. As a result, any suggestion that Catherine's role was expanding inevitably raised questions about everyone connected to the existing structure. What made the situation particularly fascinating was the contrast between two very different approaches to royal life. Queen Camilla's position within the institution had been built gradually over decades through persistence, resilience, and a carefully managed public transformation. Her journey from one of the most controversial figures in royal history to a respected member of the monarchy remains one of the most remarkable image rehabilitations ever witnessed within the royal family. Yet Catherine's rise followed an entirely different path, one rooted in public affection, consistency, and an image of modern royal responsibility that appeared to resonate across generations. For some commentators, this created a subtle but important tension. Not a personal rivalry necessarily, but a question about what kind of monarchy the public increasingly wanted to see. Was the institution moving toward a model centered on tradition and continuity as it had evolved under King Charles III, or was it gradually embracing a different vision represented by the Prince and Princess of Wales? The answer mattered because public perception has always been one of the monarchy's most valuable assets. Interestingly, several royal analysts began focusing on developments that had little to do with ceremonial appearances at all. Instead, they pointed to the gradual increase in responsibilities undertaken by Catherine and Prince William during periods when senior members of the family faced health challenges and changing workloads. While these adjustments were often presented as practical necessities, some observers believe they also offered a glimpse into how authority might function during the next royal era. That interpretation became even more intriguing when attention turned to decision-making inside the wider royal household. According to commentators who closely follow palace operations, the future king and future queen increasingly appeared associated with discussions about efficiency, modernization, and long-term institutional planning. None of this was dramatic. In fact, much of it occurred away from cameras and public ceremonies. Yet some royal watchers argued that these quieter developments could prove far more significant than any headline-grabbing appearance. And this is where another question emerged. If Catherine's growing influence reflected broader changes already underway, who stood to benefit from those changes, and who might find themselves adapting to a new reality? Every institution develops networks over time. People become accustomed to certain relationships, traditions, and informal structures. When leadership evolves, those structures often evolve as well. The process is rarely announced publicly, but it can be felt by those closest to it long before the public notices anything at all. Some commentators suggested this might explain why discussions involving Queen Camilla's wider family attracted renewed attention after Catherine's appearance. Their role had long been connected to the circumstances of King Charles's reign. Yet future royal eras inevitably bring new priorities, new advisors, and new centers of influence. The real question was not whether change would occur, but how extensive that change might eventually become. At the same time, another layer of the story was beginning to develop. Public approval ratings and media coverage increasingly highlighted the popularity of the Wales household, particularly during periods when stability and reassurance carried enormous value. Catherine's ability to project calm confidence following difficult personal circumstances strengthened her standing even further. What might once have been viewed as simple popularity was increasingly being discussed as something more substantial: credibility. That distinction matters because credibility can influence expectations. The more the public associates a future royal figure with leadership, the more attention shifts toward how that person might shape the institution itself. Suddenly, every appearance, every decision, and every symbolic moment acquires additional meaning. Actions that might previously have been considered routine become part of a larger narrative about the monarchy's future direction. Yet perhaps the most intriguing aspect of all was that none of the key players appeared eager to address these interpretations directly. There were no public disputes, no official statements responding to speculation, and no visible signs of confrontation. The silence itself became part of the story. As seasoned royal observers often note, some of the most important shifts within the monarchy occur quietly, long before they are formally acknowledged. But if Catherine's appearance represented only the visible part of a much larger transformation, then an even more important question remained unanswered. What developments behind palace walls had convinced so many experienced royal watchers that the future was arriving faster than anyone expected? And why were certain long-standing assumptions about influence inside the monarchy suddenly being questioned for the first time in years? Those questions would lead the story into an even more revealing phase. Yet the deeper royal observers looked, the less the story appeared to be about a single appearance, and the more it seemed connected to a much broader question facing the institution itself. Throughout modern royal history, periods of transition have rarely been defined by official announcements. More often, they have been shaped by subtle shifts in visibility, access, and public confidence long before constitutional realities catch up. What fascinated commentators was the possibility that something similar might already be happening now. One reason for that belief stemmed from an increasingly noticeable contrast between public expectations and palace tradition. Historically, royal authority has flowed through established structures, seniority, and carefully observed protocol. Yet public opinion operates according to very different rules. The public tends to gravitate toward figures who appear relatable, dependable, and emotionally connected to national life. In recent years, Catherine has consistently occupied that space. The challenge for the institution is that popularity and formal authority do not always move at the same pace. That contradiction raises an important question. If millions of people increasingly associate the future of the monarchy with the Prince and Princess of Wales, how does the institution manage that expectation while still preserving stability under the current reign? Some royal historians argue that this balancing act has become one of the most delicate tasks facing Buckingham Palace. Move too slowly, and the monarchy risks appearing disconnected from public sentiment. Move too quickly, and it risks creating unnecessary speculation about internal divisions. Interestingly, there are historical echoes that make the situation even more compelling. During previous royal transitions, certain family members found their influence expanding while others discovered that proximity to power was never as permanent as it appeared. Royal households naturally reorganize around future monarchs. Advisors change, priorities evolve, new working relationships emerge. What seems stable in one reign can look entirely different in the next. That process is not unique to the current generation, but it helps explain why so many analysts have become interested in what Catherine's growing prominence may signal for the years ahead. Some commentators have suggested that the real significance of her appearance lies not in symbolism alone, but in what it revealed about confidence. Confidence within a monarchy is an unusual form of power. It cannot be granted by decree, nor can it be manufactured through protocol. It develops when the public begins to view a figure as capable of carrying the institution forward through future challenges. By that measure, Catherine's standing appears stronger than ever, particularly following periods that tested both her resilience and her public image. But confidence can have unintended consequences. As attention gathers around one figure, it inevitably shifts away from others. This does not necessarily imply conflict, yet it can alter perceptions of influence in ways that become difficult to ignore. Royal commentators began noticing that conversations about the future increasingly centered on the Wales household, even when events were not directly related to them. Why was that happening? Was it simply media fascination, or was the public instinctively responding to a broader transformation already underway? The answer may lie in the changing pressures facing the monarchy itself. The institution operates in a world vastly different from the one that existed even 2 decades ago. Public scrutiny is constant, Social media accelerates narratives within hours. Every appearance, decision, and gesture is examined through multiple competing interpretations. Under those conditions, senior royals are no longer judged solely by tradition. They are judged by effectiveness, visibility, and their ability to maintain public trust. Viewed through that lens, Catherine's rise becomes part of a much larger story about adaptation. Some royal experts believe the monarchy is entering a period where emotional connection with the public may matter as much as ceremonial grandeur. If that assessment is correct, then the qualities most valued in future leadership could differ significantly from those that defined previous generations. Suddenly, what seemed like an isolated moment begins to look like evidence of a wider institutional recalibration. Another intriguing factor involves the next generation. While public discussions often focus on today's senior royals, palace planners must think decades ahead. The future of the crown ultimately depends on maintaining relevance, not only for current audiences, but also for those who will inherit the institution. In that context, the image projected by the Wales family carries enormous strategic importance. Stability, continuity, and modernity are not merely public relations concepts. They are long-term assets that influence how the monarchy is perceived both at home and abroad. Yet for all the discussion surrounding public perception, some of the most important developments may be occurring out of sight. Palace insiders, royal correspondents, and historians frequently emphasize that the most consequential decisions are rarely visible when they happen. By the time the public notices a change, preparations may have been underway for months or even years. That possibility has led many observers to reconsider recent events through an entirely different lens. What if the appearance that captured global attention was not the beginning of the story at all? What if it was merely the first moment when an existing shift became impossible for the outside world to ignore? Because as royal watchers continued connecting seemingly unrelated developments, a more intriguing pattern began to emerge, one involving private planning, evolving responsibilities, and a series of decisions that may reveal far more about the monarchy's future than any public appearance ever could. And if those pieces truly fit together, then the next stage of the story could challenge some of the biggest assumptions people have made about where power inside the royal family is actually heading. If the appearance itself sparked discussion, the reactions that followed revealed why so many royal observers believe something more significant was unfolding. What had initially been interpreted as a symbolic moment increasingly began influencing how people viewed the future structure of the monarchy. Not because anyone inside Buckingham Palace publicly announced a change, but because a growing number of developments appeared to point in the same direction. One of the clearest consequences was the way conversations inside royal commentary circles started shifting away from individual events and toward institutional expectations. For years, discussions about the future often centered on succession in abstract terms, focusing on what might happen decades from now. Suddenly, those conversations became more immediate. Analysts were no longer asking whether Catherine would eventually become one of the most influential figures in the royal family. The debate had evolved into something much more consequential: how much influence she might already possess. That distinction mattered because expectations can become a form of pressure. The more the public associates a figure with future leadership, the more every decision becomes scrutinized through that lens. Royal commentators have frequently noted that Catherine now operates within a uniquely demanding position. She is expected to embody continuity while simultaneously representing modernization. She is expected to respect tradition while demonstrating relevance. And perhaps most challenging of all, she is expected to prepare for responsibilities that technically belong to a future era while functioning within the realities of the present one. Those pressures do not exist in isolation. They affect everyone connected to the institution. Reports and commentary increasingly suggested that palace planning had become focused on long-term stability rather than short-term convenience. If that assessment is accurate, then many decisions that appear unrelated on the surface may actually be connected by a common objective: preparing the monarchy for a period of profound transition while minimizing disruption along the way. This may help explain why observers reacted so strongly to seemingly minor details surrounding Catherine's public role. A gesture that might once have attracted little attention now generated extensive analysis. A ceremonial appearance became a discussion about authority. A routine engagement transformed into a conversation about future leadership. What changed was not necessarily the event itself. What changed was the context surrounding it, and that context was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. Royal watchers have pointed out that institutions often reveal their priorities indirectly. Rarely does a monarchy announce its internal calculations in real time. Instead, patterns emerge. Responsibilities gradually shift. Visibility changes. Certain figures become more central to public-facing activities, while others become less prominent. None of these developments alone proves anything definitive. Yet when viewed collectively, they can create a picture that is far more revealing than any single headline. The implications extended beyond palace walls. Media organizations, commentators, and even international audiences increasingly appear to interpret royal events through the perspective of the next generation rather than the current one. That trend carried both opportunities and risks. On one hand, it demonstrated remarkable confidence in the Wales household. On the other, it raised expectations to levels that few public figures could comfortably satisfy indefinitely. Some analysts have argued that this growing focus may be creating a challenge for the institution itself. The monarchy depends on continuity, but continuity becomes more complicated when public attention begins accelerating toward the future. How does the institution maintain balance when anticipation starts competing with established structures? How does it preserve unity when external observers constantly attempt to identify winners, losers, and shifting centers of influence? Those questions became even more intriguing as discussions expanded beyond personalities and into strategy. Increasingly, commentators describe Catherine's appeal not simply as a matter of popularity, but as part of a broader vision for how the monarchy could evolve. Whether those interpretations are entirely accurate remains open to debate. Yet their existence alone reveals something important. People are no longer merely reacting to appearances. They're trying to understand what those appearances might signify for the decades ahead. That effort to interpret the future has created another layer of pressure. Every institution relies on confidence. Confidence from the public. Confidence from its own members. Confidence that long-term plans remain achievable despite uncertainty. If royal observers are correct that a new phase of preparation is already underway, then maintaining that confidence becomes increasingly important. The challenge is that confidence often invites scrutiny, and scrutiny inevitably generates questions. Questions about influence, questions about priorities, questions about who will shape the next chapter, and questions about whether certain assumptions that once seemed permanent are now being quietly reconsidered. What makes this especially significant is that reactions have not been limited to commentators alone. Across royal coverage, there has been a noticeable increase in discussions about responsibility, leadership style, and institutional direction. These are not the kinds of conversations that emerge when people believe everything is remaining exactly the same. They emerge when audiences sense that a larger transition may already be gathering momentum beneath the surface. Yet perhaps the most revealing consequence is the one receiving the least attention. While public discussion continues focusing on visible appearances and symbolic moments, some observers believe the real story may lie elsewhere entirely, in the decisions being made before those moments ever reach the public eye. If true, then the appearance that captured worldwide attention was not the cause of the changing atmosphere. It was merely evidence of forces that had been building long beforehand. And that possibility leads directly to the most important question yet. Because if multiple developments, shifting expectations, changing perceptions of influence, and growing institutional pressures are all converging toward the same destination, then what exactly are palace planners preparing for? More importantly, what happens if the decisions already being made behind closed doors eventually become visible to the public? The answer could fundamentally reshape how everything discussed so far is understood. And according to some royal observers, the signs of that approaching turning point may already be hiding in plain sight. What ultimately makes the story so compelling is that the appearance itself may be the least important part of it. By now, the discussion has moved far beyond a single public moment, a single photograph, or even a single interpretation. What royal observers have been trying to understand is whether that moment revealed something that had already been developing for years beneath the surface of public royal life. Throughout the story, one theme has appeared again and again without ever being formally announced: preparation. Not preparation in the ceremonial sense that accompanies royal events, but preparation in the institutional sense that determines how a monarchy survives periods of uncertainty. Modern royal households do not simply react to change. They spend years anticipating it. They examine public expectations, leadership challenges, succession realities, and long-term pressures that may not become visible to the public until much later. Viewed through that lens, Catherine's growing prominence begins to look less like an isolated development and more like part of a broader strategic evolution. Some royal commentators have suggested that the institution is gradually positioning its most trusted figures where they can provide the greatest stability during an era of rapid social, political, and cultural change. If that interpretation is correct, then the significance of Catherine's appearance was never about symbolism alone. It was about what that symbolism revealed regarding confidence, trust, and institutional priorities. That possibility helps explain why reactions were so intense. People were not simply responding to what they saw. They were responding to what they believed it represented. For many members of the public, Catherine increasingly embodies qualities that royal audiences traditionally value: duty without complaint, visibility without overexposure, and leadership without obvious self-promotion. Whether one agrees with those assessments or not, they have become a powerful part of the narrative surrounding her role. Yet the larger implication reaches beyond any individual royal figure. The monarchy itself faces questions that every long-standing institution eventually confronts. How does it remain relevant without abandoning tradition? How does it modernize without losing identity? How does it maintain continuity when public expectations evolve faster than constitutional structures? These challenges cannot be solved through ceremonies alone. They require leadership capable of balancing history with adaptation, heritage with practicality, and symbolism with substance. Some analysts have argued that this balancing act may be the real story hidden beneath the headlines. The public conversation often focuses on personalities because personalities are easier to understand. Institutions are more complicated, but institutions are ultimately what endure. When royal watchers analyze appearances, responsibilities, and shifting perceptions of influence, they are often attempting to answer a much larger question: what kind of monarchy is being built for the future? That question becomes even more important when viewed through the perspective of legacy. King Charles III inherited a monarchy facing significant pressures and worked to guide it through a period of extraordinary change. At the same time, the Prince and Princess of Wales represent the generation expected to carry the institution forward for decades to come. The challenge facing every future monarch is not simply preserving what exists. It is ensuring that the institution remains meaningful to people who will experience a very different world than previous generations did. In that context, Catherine's role carries significance far beyond popularity or public appearances. Royal commentators have noted that her influence may ultimately be measured not by individual moments, but by whether she helps shape a monarchy capable of maintaining public trust through future transitions. Trust, after all, remains one of the crown's most valuable assets. Without trust, tradition becomes fragile. With trust, even major changes can be accepted as part of a continuing story. Another revealing aspect of this situation is how differently it appears depending on where one chooses to look. From one perspective, the story concerns public perception, media narratives, and evolving expectations. From another, it concerns succession planning, institutional resilience, and the careful management of long-term change. Both interpretations may contain elements of truth. The challenge is understanding how they intersect. What has become increasingly clear is that the conversation surrounding Catherine is no longer limited to what she represents today. It increasingly concerns what she may represent tomorrow. The attention surrounding her appearance was significant not because it provided answers, but because it encouraged people to ask new questions. Questions about leadership, questions about continuity, questions about how future generations of the royal family may approach responsibilities that are constantly evolving. And perhaps that is why this story continues attracting such attention from experienced royal observers. They recognize that the most important developments inside a monarchy rarely announce themselves with certainty. They emerge gradually through patterns, reactions, expectations, and changing assumptions. Only later do people look back and realize that what seemed like an ordinary moment was actually part of a much larger transformation already underway. The immediate discussion surrounding Catherine's appearance may eventually fade, as all royal headlines do. What may endure is the broader question it raised. Not whether one event changed everything overnight, but whether it offered a glimpse of how the monarchy itself is preparing for the decades ahead. Because in the end, this was never simply a story about appearances, influence, or even palace dynamics. It was a story about transition, about how institutions evolve while attempting to preserve continuity, about how future leadership gradually comes into focus long before formal change arrives, and about how public expectations can sometimes reveal the direction of history before official events catch up. Some observers believe that future historians may view moments like these as small but revealing indicators of a monarchy adapting to a new era. Others argue that such interpretations place too much weight on symbolism. Both perspectives remain valid. What remains uncertain is whether this will ultimately be remembered as a routine stage in the royal family's evolution, or as one of those rare moments when the future briefly became visible before anyone fully understood what they were seeing. Was this simply another chapter in an ongoing royal story, or an early sign of how the monarchy is quietly preparing itself for the next generation? If you enjoyed this deep dive into the royal family, Prince William, Catherine, Princess of Wales, King Charles III, Princess, and the future of the monarchy, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our next royal analysis. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We'll see you in the next video.